Welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Look who's back. How's it going there, Matt?
Yeah. Hey, it's great, James. Great to be back.
Awesome to have you on the podcast. Got a great episode for you. We're talking about high risk today with Josh over at Helios Payments. We're going to talk about a lot of high risk issues. Patty, give them a little preview. What's the insider's report about today?
About buy now, pay later, and a great opportunity that agents and ISOs have out there to do that with their merchants.
Love it. I finish it up with questions from the field. I talk about how to sell technology and point of sale systems, specifically as an ISO. How do you get your team moving forward with that? So I don't know about you, Patty, but I'm excited about the episode. I'm ready to dive in.
I am too, James. Let's go.
All right, everybody. I am here today with Josh Ewan. Josh is the president at Helios Payments. How you doing today, Josh?
Doing good, James. How are you?
Awesome, man. Doing great. We have Patty back with us. Really glad to have Patty back on the podcast today.
Really happy to be back, James.
Definitely. So we're excited about that. So today, Josh and I and Patty are going to talk about high risk. And so we're going to talk about a lot of the different challenges that, high risk processors, face on a regular basis. We're going to talk about, you building a high risk portfolio, all that stuff. So, Josh, before we get into that, I'd love to get a little bit of your backstory. So can you tell us how you get into credit card processing? And then of course, how that transitioned into Helios and high risk?
Sure. So, and I think that the history, I'm going to go back all the way to the very beginning for me.
Sure.
Because I think it builds context, right? So,
Sure.
In the late 90s, like 97-ish, I started in e-commerce doing website development. I had a web dev company for about 6 years, a web hosting company in tandem with that. I've done online marketing, affiliate marketing for years. So that's all my background is the e-commerce. So about 10 years ago, my business partner and I started a direct-to-consumer skincare company selling skincare online.
Sure.
And the most critical, most difficult piece of that business model is the credit card processing, because it is considered high risk, there's high chargebacks and so on.
Right.
So about 5 years ago, we founded Helios Payments. We had spent 10 years building up, the knowledge and the relationships in the high risk, processing space.
Right.
And 5 years ago, we set up Helios Payments. And that's still what we focus on is, direct consumer, e-commerce, types of products.
That's really cool, Josh. Tell me, high risk is a pretty broad subject, a topic, shall we say, and it can be misunderstood. Maybe it'd be great if you could obviously e-commerce and that type of stuff is high risk, but there's other avenues. I was wondering if maybe you could explain to us, what exactly a high risk account is, and maybe, what is it that keeps traditional merchant processors from wanting to deal with high risk? Sure.
So you're right. It is, kind of a really broad umbrella because it can be card present too.
Correct.
So, and James, I'm going to shoot you over a bullet point list of just like verticals, right? Verticals,
awesome.
business models that are high risk. Maybe you can float them across the screen or something.
Yeah.
So,
we can do that.
So types of products that would be considered high risk would be, in general, have higher chance of chargebacks and refunds, right? Mm-hmm. So more risk there for the bank. Maybe more regulation, like tobacco and firearms, CBD, things like that. So just real quick, direct consumer products online, diet, muscle pills, skincare, travel, tech support, adult, trial and subscription billing. That's a huge one.
Right.
Because the chargebacks are high, right? So it can be a lot of different things, but in general, it's anything that would really, increase the risk for the bank. And it varies based on the processor. Some processors view different verticals differently. Some will accept CBD, some won't. Some will accept trial, some won't, and so on.
Now, it sounds like, Josh, you had that background in high risk, which I'm sure really influenced your decision. But I'm curious from like a, financial return on investment perspective, why does Helios focus so much on high risk and building that book versus, say, traditional processing? I'm just curious to get some context for our listeners that maybe are doing traditional and they just don't understand the appeal. Why go after these high risk accounts?
Yeah, sure. No, and I totally get it. So I think last time you and I spoke, you were helping us with sort of a little retail pilot program,
yes.
right? And trying to, find a way that worked for us. So we've got our way, and that works for
Right.
us. And it's probably very different than anyone else.
Right.
Because in terms of marketing, we don't do a lot.
Right.
Most of our leads come through existing customers and referrals. So
Right.
we really network with a lot of people in our space, fulfillment houses, customer support teams, and so on.
Right.
And that drives the leads to us. So the decision to go with high risk was really our experience and the traction we were getting. We tried low risk, and it didn't make sense for us, right?
Right.
We couldn't get that piece of the puzzle to work, right?
So
Was
really
that-
more of a, go ahead, Patty.
No, I was just wondering, is that because of the focus of your focus, and it was sort of like a nuisance, the low risk stuff? Was it just because the payback wasn't good enough?
I think, if you stick with anything long enough, right,
Right.
you're going to get it. We probably could have gotten traction. I
Okay.
think it was a combination of things. The person that was in that seat doing sales, probably could have been different. Maybe we could have done different lead gen. So I wouldn't say it was a nuisance. We just, we saw the opportunity with what we were already doing and decided, what,
It was just a good opportunity, and you stuck with it.
Yeah,
is
it's not
what you're
broke,
saying.
don't fix it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, I like that. And, I think it's really interesting, Josh. I mean, it kind of does, lend itself to like more of a broad topic, right? Which is just focus, I mean, I think it's like I love what you just said. If you do anything long enough, generally you're going to figure it out. It's a question of how long is it going to take?
Yeah, you will. And honestly, I think we will get back to high risk or to low risk.
Right,
I think as we grow, we're going to need to start, working on our portfolio balance.
Sure.
Right.
And you absolutely need that.
Yeah. But I think it's interesting because there's always that opportunity cost is I think what you're talking about, right? It's like for you right now to go after low risk, that means you're taking resources that could be going after high risk, and there still is a lot of meat on that bone for you. So, it's always like a little bit tricky because it's like, you want to go after something else, but there's always that opportunity cost. And I think ultimately most of our listeners, they really need to have that focus and like pick something and they stick with it for a little while until you really get it working. And then to your point, once you have things running smoothly and everything, you're taking maximum advantage of existing opportunity, then of course you want to try to broaden a little bit and look at other options. But, super interesting. So let's talk about this because you kind of alluded to it a minute ago. Let's talk about prospecting for a second. When it comes to low risk, yeah, it's pretty simple. It's like everybody's a prospect, right? Just go out to your local busiest street and just walk into the businesses or call them. And it's like, yeah, of course, they're a prospect. So when we talk about high risk, how are you finding these businesses? I know, you have other avenues and things, but if you can give us some broad concepts and some insights, I mean, how do you get into the high risk side and actually find potential prospects?
Well, so for us, it was kind of easy because we were already in it, right? So we had been in this kind of ecosystem for a decade, knowing the fulfillment houses and the processors and the, the merchants and all these things. So I don't do prospecting. I just don't. And your ears are probably bleeding underneath the headphones.
No, not at all.
I know that's.
No.
That's
What's funny, Josh, about this is I'm always preaching this stuff. But the truth is I don't prospect either. I mean, for my personal, like for my business,
Mhm.
I don't prospect. People come to me, and I think it's
you don't
that's
have
the
to at this
dream,
point.
right?
Yeah. So that's the tipping point, right? You don't have to because you built up the momentum and the relationships, right?
Yeah. So let's go back to when you were getting started with this. Your first. How did you get your first 10 high risk accounts? You know what I mean?
So I mean, we do trade shows, not presently. So 2020 is a non-trade show year for us, but we usually do a couple larger trade shows that are very niche specific, and that generates a lot of leads. And then, aside from that, it's all just referrals.
So talk about the trade shows a little bit, because I don't think we've ever covered that on the podcast. Can you give us a couple of things? You go to a trade show. How do you choose which trade shows to go to? What do you do when you get there? What's the time investment? How do you get leads? Do you have any kind of insights on the trade show side?
Yeah, and also, are they very specific? I was just wondering about that too.
Yeah, Patty, that's a really good point. So. For us, we focus on, quite a few different verticals, but they're all kind of interrelated. They're all going to be e-com, right?
Okay.
So with trade shows, I think it does have to be vertical specific or market specific. So for instance, CBD is huge right now, and
Right.
it's definitely high risk. It's definitely challenging to get processing for it. And there are a number of great, CBD or cannabis related trade shows.
Mm-hmm.
So, even just walking the floor, you can meet with vendors and, you start developing that relationship. You can meet with, merchants and so on. So it has to be vertical specific. And yeah, I really don't know what else to say.
You guys have a booth there and everything? Like, you don't just go and talk to vendors, you actually have a booth.
Yeah. So, I mean, there were a few trade shows last year that we just sort of walked the floor.
Right.
Okay.
But yeah, usually a 10-foot space, and booth and table. And
do you do anything to get the leads? I don't know, giveaway contest, whatever, that kind of, do you that gimmick kind of more stuff, or is it more just like just getting relationships as you talk to people, or what?
Just informational.
Oh, it's both, right? So you've got to have the conversation, right?
Right.
So I've been doing trade shows for a really long time, and when I first started, I would buy the big boxes of all the swag, right?
Right.
So you got to have the right swag, whether it's a hand sanitizer with your brand on it or stress balls. But I stopped doing that years ago. It's just it's exhausting. What has worked a lot better, and it's just a dirty little secret. What works a lot better and it's a heck of a lot cheaper is put your money in a giveaway. So for us, it's, we usually do Amazon products. So Amazon Echo Show, things like that.
Right.
A couple hundred bucks. You would spend, $1,000, maybe $1,500 on swag, right?
Right.
And then
Sure.
you come home with all this stuff. So yeah, that's what we do. We have,
I like that.
just a giveaway. You put your card in, and we start the
Right.
There you
conversation.
go. That's what I was about to ask you. So basically, what you're saying is, if you go to a trade show, one of the things you can do is buy something that people are going to want that's broadly, useful to people, like an Echo or something like that. And then you have a jar or a container of some kind at your booth, and you say, giving away a Echo or whatever, and then people put their business card in, and you pull one out at the end of the show, and that person gets an Echo.
Yeah, exactly.
Love it.
Yeah. That's
Awesome.
cool.
Yeah,
Very
good.
cool.
Then what do you do with those? So then, like, you have all these business cards. Obviously, you try to talk to people when they come up and put the business card in. But I'm assuming then you have some kind of a process then after the trade show to then like call everybody to put a business card in or something like that, right?
Yeah. So what we've done in the past is, myself and our president or our CEO, we would be at the booth,
Right.
and we have our Slack open,
Right.
and we have one of our other staff back at home with Slack open, and our CRM. So we'll take a picture of the business card,
Cool.
stamp a couple notes like, hey, talk to this guy about, CBD or whatever.
Right.
Sure.
Or,
Sure.
possible referral deal. And then you enter in the CRM, and then we come back and kind of, break that up a little bit. Maybe there's a small list for referral partners,
Sure.
a small list for, some, specific vertical or something.
Got it.
Very cool. Very cool.
I like it. Okay. So once you have somebody interested, so you have a prospect, you met them at a trade show, it's a referral, whatever it is. What do you do to qualify your prospects? Because obviously when it comes to high risk, it is broad, but it's also, there's businesses that would not be a good fit. What are your criteria when you're looking at who you want to work with? You have certain criteria that you look at?
It's tough. And maybe you could speak to this from the point of view of low risk. That might educate me, or definitely educate me, right? But you can definitely waste time in this business, right? So working with, a merchant that's not the right fit, or a merchant that doesn't have their stuff together, because, putting together a package, you've got to get all the documents, and high risk is,
very different.
the package is roughly the same that you're submitting to underwriting, but it definitely gets, gone through a lot more, and the website and everything.
Right.
So you can spin your wheels a lot.
Yeah.
So as far as qualifying, you kind of know, I know at this point, kind of early on in the conversation by asking probing questions, hey, how's your monthly volume look?
Sure.
What can I see your website? These kinds of things. So
when you think about ones where you have wasted maybe a lot of time on somebody that, ended up not working out, is there any pattern or anything that you see there? Is it normally something to do with paperwork, or is it, what are the reasons where it ends up being, you thought maybe it was going to be a good fit, but it turned out not to be?
Yeah, sure. So I would say offshore, some offshore, right? So Europe is, for the most part, pretty decent.
Sure.
We've had bad experiences with India merchants.
Mhm.
It's a massive country, so I know there are
Right.
great merchants there, but
Yes.
we've had some challenges there in Asia as well.
Okay.
So you have to be aware of fraud and things like that.
Right.
We've got packages submitted that were just completely fraudulent. So
Sure.
there's definitely that aspect. You're not meeting them face to face. You're not going into a coffee shop.
Right.
Or something. So that and probably kind of time wasters. So our unique selling proposition is really our experience in this space, right?
Right.
So a merchant comes to me, wants to sell a skincare product, wants to sell a diet product, has an idea of what they want to do, but may not know, the fulfillment process and fulfillment houses, customer support teams, and so that's really our biggest value, I think, to clients. And sometimes, having those conversations, we're very generous with our time and educating merchants and introducing them to the right contacts to help them get started or maybe improve their business. And sometimes you have a merchant just you spend time and
Right.
you kind of love to, and it doesn't pan out, and that's just part of the,
Yeah.
of
Sure.
the game.
Sure. So it sounds like a couple of things you said, just unpack that a little bit. On the high risk side, it sounds like one of the things you're saying is, as far as offshore, do a little more due diligence. Maybe there could end up being some time wasters.
Yeah.
I love the concept that you are providing this additional value. In other words, your vertical so well that not only are you doing credit card processing, but it sounds like you're saying your clients are coming to you for advice on fulfillment and other things that they need connections, and you have that connection base, within your industry. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, definitely, because it's tough sometimes, and I'm sure you've experienced this, to separate yourself. When you're an agent, you don't, if you're not an ISO, right? They can get to WorldPay, or they can get to PPS through any number of different agents, right? So what is special about you? And you don't want to just fight on price. You don't want to be in a race to zero,
Right. Especially
So
in high
you gotta
risk.
find some other ways. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. No, I like that. I think that's an important lesson. I think a lot of agents that, are hopefully listening right now, to me, like, that is so huge. Like, I'll even give a personal example. When I was building my local book of business, I was QuickBooks certified. And I also had a marketing company as well. And so, those two things together, I mean, it's pretty difficult to find a small business owner that isn't having trouble with QuickBooks or
Right.
doesn't need help with marketing. Right.
Right.
So, but the funny thing is, credit card processing is actually more valuable than either of those two things. So what I chose to do was I took that talent that I had in those areas and I gave that away for free
Mhm.
in order to get credit card processing. So I would go in and talk to them and, hey, I'm a marketing expert and I'm QuickBooks certified. And we'd strike up a lot of conversations from that. I get referrals from that. My referrals were not always from credit card processing, and be like, hey, we do our credit card processing with this guy and he's a QuickBooks expert. You should call him because you're having a problem with QuickBooks. So, I think having that is really, even from a prospecting perspective, is really a great one. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about bank relationships. So I think one of the biggest misunderstandings about high risk that individuals in the low risk side have is, when you're selling low risk, this idea of the bank, it doesn't really come up a lot, because you think really of it more like your ISO, because it's low risk. So the bank seems like they're not really very involved. What's really happening is the bank is given these underwriting guidelines. As long as you stick to those underwriting guidelines, they know it's going to be low risk. And so we just don't deal with that. But when it comes to high risk, of course, you need different relationships. You need banks that are willing to do accounts. So talk a little bit about, how have you established these banking relationships? How do you manage these banking relationships? Like, give us any insights that you have on kind of that side of building a high risk book.
Sure. So yeah, relationships are huge. If you have a CBD merchant and they need credit card processing, you need to know which banks to take them to. So we have partnerships with 35 different acquirers in the US and the EU. We can also place merchants in Australia, South America, and Asia. It's not really our bread and butter, though.
Right.
But the relationships are key, and it's something that we continually work on. So every week, there's usually a couple of phone calls. Hey, XYZ processor, I'd like to talk to you about, submitting some deals to you. when you look at their website, you can tell where they're placing deals, right? Scroll down to the bottom, so-and-so is an ISO
Right.
of Wells Fargo Bank. So it's something we constantly work on to improve. It's definitely part of our secret sauce, right? So having those relationships, because there's a lot of value in that. So I would say, that first for us is that experience, and the second is that relationship. So a merchant can come to us, and I know pretty much with 95% certainty, I can take that merchant and place them at any one of the banks or processors that a competitor will be able to, right?
Right.
And sometimes there's not a lot of meat on the bone in those deals. Certainly when you get into like trial credit card processing, the pad on top of interchange is a lot higher.
Right.
Split tends to be a little bit lower, and sometimes you get into referral deals and stuff. So even though there isn't meat on the bone on those kinds of deals with those banks, it's still something that we do because we want to keep the merchant solely with us, right?
Yeah, for sure. Well, and of course, it's always going to generate referral relationships as well, right? I mean, you get a happy customer, even if you're not making a ton of money on that one, odds are they're going to refer you to somebody else, and maybe that's the deal that they make a ton of money on.
Yeah, exactly.
So, okay. So I have one more question for you. It's been very interesting. I always love talking about high risk because we don't get to talk about it very much on the podcast. So I have a really broad question for you for the last one. I love asking this. So, and first, how long have you been doing this with Helios Payments?
So we actually, yesterday was our 5-year anniversary.
Oh, that's awesome. Congratulations, man. That's great.
Congrats.
Thanks.
Yeah.
That's cool. So if you could go back in time 5 years, knowing what you know now, is there anything that you would do differently, and what would it be? Do you have one or two things, any insights that you can think of that where if I go back in 5 years, knowing what I know now, this is what I would do to scale up faster or to achieve my goals quicker?
Really just one, work harder. That's seriously, that's it. I know that's not like, what
I love it.
What your readers want to hear, or your listeners want to hear, but really work harder. I mean, there's no way to, you learn a lot along the way. So, for me, all the bumps and bruises that we've had, and there definitely have been some, that's all part of the process, and it's beautiful and it keeps going. Right. So, but I'll give you something so you have a little meat. I think I would have spent more time educating myself and watching channels like yours on YouTube. And believe me, I did. When we were going through that retail test, James Shepherd playlist. So I think educating myself and trying to learn more and get a better understanding of credit card processing, maybe some other avenues that we could have tested too.
Yeah, I love what you said, and I think my perspective, I really agree, because it's interesting. There's just a certain amount of mistakes that you have to get through, and the harder you work, the faster you get through them.
Right.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah.
I feel like for me, it's like, man, when I started out in credit card processing, I was working around the clock, and it allowed me to kind of figure things out. But it's like, to your point too, I think, self-improvement and like education and learning the things, I don't know about you, but it always kind of like, it's fun, but it's also really frustrating when you are reading a new book or a new resource or go through a new training and you learn something and you're like, if I knew this 12 months ago, I wouldn't have done this, or I would have done that, and I would have been massively more successful. And so to me, that every time I experience that, it just fuels my drive to read the next book and, to learn the next thing, because it's like, I know there are so many things out there right now that I don't know. And if I did, oh man, it would just really dramatically make my life better, but I don't know those things yet. And that kind of realization is very humbling and very frustrating sometimes, and kind of drives you to learn more. So I love it. So now, Josh, I wasn't sure, share with us here at the end. I don't know what kind of partnerships you may be looking for. Obviously we have both agents, ISO execs that are listening right now. Are there partnerships that you're looking for in the industry? And also, is there somewhere you could send our listeners if they wanted to learn more about you and about Helios Payments?
Yeah, so I'll send you a link to our website. So it's just heliospayments.com.
Sure.
So yes, we're always looking for relationships. And I would think for your audience, probably what percentage do you think is focused on low risk?
Oh, most. I would say 80% probably.
Yeah.
So that if that is an interest for them, is learning about high risk, or they have high risk accounts they don't know what to do with, we absolutely welcome that conversation. We work with a lot of agents and also referral partners,
Sure.
different vendors in the space.
Sure.
And sometimes with agents, we'll have reciprocal, referral deals. So let's say you bring me a deal, I'll give you a cut of what we make on it, and vice versa.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely love to have those conversations, and with ISOs as well.
Sure.
We're always looking for, to work with great companies, that can that really understand the space. They understand how to handle high risk, and they understand how to underwrite quickly. Right? So,
Sure. Got it. So basically, those who don't understand high risk but are coming across high risk accounts, they could leverage your setup there to get those accounts boarded, potentially into a rev share, and then you're always looking for those acquirers that specialize in high risk as a potential place to put merchant accounts.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. And you said that website again is Helios Payments. That's HELIOS.
Yeah, HELIOS PAYMENTS.com.
Awesome. Heliopayments.com. Josh, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate all the insights, and I wish you great success.
Really educational. Thank you, Josh.
Hey, thank you both.
This is the Insider's Report with Patty Murphy.
So, James, we've done a few interviews in the past about these buy now, pay later services.
Right.
But it seems to me, and, even then when we did, I think about a year ago, we did our first interview, and I kind of thought it was cool, but it was sort of like a one-off kind of thing.
Right.
I don't think that's the case anymore.
Yeah.
I think this COVID thing is really changing spending habits.
Yes.
And that merchants and acquirers and processors kind of are starting to play catch up. Because installment plans, they've been around for years. Right. But the financial consequences of COVID-19 are, adding even greater import.
Yes.
I've been amazed at the impact on consumer spending. And I just did a little research this morning. The best I could come up with was July, because we're still in September.
Right.
But between the 2nd of March and the end of, the beginning of March and the end of July, consumer revolving credit fell by nearly $100 billion.
No, wait, what do you mean by that? Is that means the available balance, or what do you mean?
What they put on their credit cards.
So they're using their credit cards less?
Less.
Really? Oh, so is that just because spending is down, or they're being more careful?
Well, that's it. Because I think what a lot of it is that people are, and I think I'm one of them. Things are still a little iffy. I don't want to build my balance up.
Right.
If I'm going to get laid off in a month.
Right. You might need to use that later. Okay.
You might need to use that money later. That's how, I cleared off a lot of my balances back, when I got my, what do you call it, stimulus check, right? It was like, I'm going to pay down a balance so that I have that balance available later when I need it. And I think that, so basically, so it went from about 818 billion to about 727 billion, which is,
wow, that's a huge drop.
It's a huge drop. And that was both Equifax. I found very similar numbers with both Equifax and the Federal Reserve. Because Equifax does it, but the Fed does it. And, and the Fed, if you look at the Fed numbers, it was like, new outstandings were in the negative, and then in June and July, they started trending up a bit, but they still were, pretty subdued. Let's put it that way.
So I guess what you're trying to say is if that's the case and people don't want to use their available credit on their credit card, but they still do want to make that larger purchase, they need some other way to buy it. Is that what you're saying?
Another way to buy it, an installment, these buy, and actually here's an interesting
consumer financing, basically.
Consumer finance. Doug Bland, who's SVP at PayPal, put it this way. He said, consumers are looking for more flexibility and responsible ways to pay. And retailers, of course, are looking to increase sales, particularly with the upcoming holiday season. Right. They don't want to take on additional risk, but they certainly want to sell more. And and PayPal is the latest company to enter into this buy now, pay later market.
So they have their own consumer finance product now.
Exactly. It's
I didn't know
called
that.
Pay in 4, and it allows consumers to make online purchases without interest or added fees and pay it over a 6-week period.
Huh. Wow. Very
Which
short period, but I mean, that's
Very
still,
short period, true, but you know, it's interesting. I had a incident with a friend's dog earlier in the summer, and I ended up with this humongous vet bill, right? I mean,
right.
totally unexpected experience, right?
Right.
And I have one of the, gotta love the vet. Well, we'll give you 6 months, same as cash. I'm like, sold,
Right.
because it was close to $4,000 to shell that out
Right.
in
Right.
one fell swoop was a
Right.
lot. To put it on my Mastercard, wow, that's gonna really
Right.
mess up my balance. So
Right.
I like the 6 months more than the 4, but this Pay in 4 thing.
Yeah.
What's great is that it can be integrated with the existing PayPal pricing for the
Sure.
merchant.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
they're not really paying, additional fees, and PayPal's pretty much taking on the risk.
Right. So basically, it's one more way that PayPal is encroaching on the ISOs that listen to our podcast.
Yep.
And they need to wake up and make sure they're providing consumer financing that maybe could be significantly better even than that. But they
One
need
would
to
think.
make those options available to their merchants so that their merchants don't say, oh, maybe we should be processing through PayPal so that
Right.
that consumer financing option.
Yeah, yeah. And so which is interesting that you say that, because within days of PayPal announcing this new offering, Mastercard and TSYS announced that they were teaming up to create a similar
I did. You know what?
offer.
I did see that actually. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And it's they signed up the first merchant that they signed up was Fanatics. That's the company that sells all that licensed sports merchandise online.
Sure. Okay.
Get your Nats, get your Phillies
Sure.
jacket or hat or whatever.
Right.
And then Mastercard announced it has a partnership with this company called QuadPay,
Okay.
which also it's been doing buy now, pay later for both online and face-to-face merchants
Sure.
for a few years now. They have it, they do it through a mobile app mostly.
Okay.
And now it's going to use this platform that Mastercard has called Vize, V-I-Z-E. I think that's how you pronounce it.
Okay.
So that it can expand its reach
Right.
for financing options, and of course, it's great for Mastercard and its acquirers.
Sure.
Huh. And the benefits. I mean, I found this stat in a QuadPay press release that just kind of blew my mind. They said that merchants that it serves with its, buy now, pay later option are seeing average ticket lists on the order of 20% or more. Which,
Wow.
that
Yeah.
says a lot.
Huge.
I remember you telling a story when we interviewed somebody about a year ago about how you were in a store with your wife and you really liked this couch and you didn't have the right credit card with you and they offered you a buy now, pay later. I mean, that was a huge ticket lift, right?
I think it was about $4 or $5 grand if I remember correctly.
Yeah. So
And if they would, it was one of those things where because I'll tell you one of the things that's interesting about it, and this is a really interesting topic today because even for myself, and I mean, obviously I'm in a place in my life where, if I want something, I buy it, but,
right.
But what's interesting is like the situation you're talking about there, we went to this, it was actually a Boscov's and they had this really nice couch we wanted and stuff. Well, the problem is, my debit card has $1,000 per transaction limit.
Right.
So I want to spend $5 grand. How do I do that? Well,
Right.
that has that limit. My credit card, I think, has a $2,000 per transaction limit. Now I can
Right.
call them so I can get them on the phone and wait on hold for 20 minutes and then
Mhm.
say, hey, I'm about to do a big purchase, and then they can lift it. I don't carry checks with me anymore. I'm not going to bring $5,000 in cash. So it's like, even when you do have the money, just from a pure convenience perspective, how do
Correct.
you sell how do you sell a $10,000 pool or
Right.
a $7,000 pool table or,
Uh-huh.
you know what I mean? Or a motorcycle or whatever, like,
Sure.
so yeah, I think it's very interesting. I think and I think especially when you get up, it sounds like some of these you're talking about are even now going after these micro deals where people are spending $100, $200, $300 and they want to spread it out over 6 weeks or something, which is interesting as well,
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, and especially when you look at some of the statistics about, how much cash on hand the average household has for an emergency purchase, for example.
Right.
It's not in the thousands. It's at, I think actually it's gone up a little bit, but the Federal Reserve said about a year ago that the average household had about $600, available for emergency purchases. I mean, when I think I'm doing bad, I look at that stat, right? Like,
but you know
okay.
what? I mean, and it's like, I can remember where we had about $50 for an emergency purchase,
I remember that too. Believe me, and it sort of, it makes you think, God, as I'm not sure if our listeners know, but I had this accident that laid me up for almost 3 months. If I didn't have emergency cushion,
right. Right.
it would have been devastating, but thankfully I did. And,
right.
and thankfully, actually, I had my accident on the day I became qualified for Medicare. So my medical bills were a lot less. But
there's your silver lining, I guess, right?
That was my silver. That's what I said to people. It's like, hey, it happened on the day I qualified. So
right.
What a great birthday present.
Yeah. Oh my. Yeah. Well,
but anyway,
super interesting stuff, though.
Yeah, I wanted to throw out a few stats, if you don't mind, John.
Go ahead. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, because, at a time when, like we've talked about a lot, when merchants and consumers are struggling to stay afloat, something like this has some real staying power. Forrester Research issued a report that said 1 in 4 retailers are now offering some type of installment payment plan.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's
and 4 out of 10 consumers are aware of and using these.
Wow, big opportunity.
That's a huge opportunity.
Yeah.
One provider, Klarna, Klarna, reports that it had nearly 1 million consumers of its service, 1 million new consumers from March 1st to June 30th. And
wow.
Another provider offered similar statistics. Payments.com, that's a pretty popular online resource.
Right.
Projects that 1/3 of online retailers will be offering these solutions by next year.
Wow. Good. Now, I talk about a big opportunity, and it's so tied into payments.
It's so tied into payments. Yeah. Another study suggests that among consumers that are using these options, 1 in 5 did it for the first time in 2020.
Wow. Boy, I'll tell you, that's some amazing stats.
And 14% of consumers used the option because their credit cards were maxed out.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And here's some of the areas where they're most commonly used.
Okay.
I pulled this from a variety of sites: electronics, clothing, furniture, appliances, and household essentials.
And you know what, too, Patty? I think it's worth stating that, we're early enough in this trend that a lot of the people that already have that service are paying a fortune for it. The merchant.
Yes.
And they're also, of course, the consumer is also paying a lot for it as well. So I wouldn't, I think it's an interesting one because it's like, it's definitely a land grab opportunity on 2 fronts, because for one, there's a lot of retailers and companies that should have this that don't. But then there's also a lot that have it that are paying a lot that, would be actually very open to having that conversation, I feel like.
I think that's exactly it. Yeah, I agree. And I think that, to use an overused term, it's a greenfield opportunity. If you're looking to give your clients, another tool for sales.
Well, I'll tell you what's so ironic about this. I literally, right before the podcast, was emailing with Mark Beauchamp, Serve Credit.
Sure.
And, he was talking about some of the things they're doing. So I think, this has been so compelling. I think a lot of our listeners are like, okay, what can I do about this? So now maybe some names. Let's just throw a couple out. I know we have Serve Credit, SURV, Serve Credit.
Right.
That's Mark
Right.
Champ's company. They work with ISOs. They do all of this consumer financing stuff. They work with individual agents.
Right.
We've had FlexBuy on
FlexBuy,
here.
that was the one I was thinking of. Yeah.
Okay.
And that's
FlexBuy is,
FLEXX, isn't it?
yes, 2 X's. So,
BUI. Yeah.
yep. Now I actually personally, my company, we worked with them a little bit as well on my 6-week jumpstart program because it's like $1,500 right now.
Uh-huh.
And we have like the financing option there that we've done. So they do really good with the online type services like coaching, things like that. But they have a lot of options as well. Not quite as big of an operation, but they have a really good program. So check out FlexBuy and Surf Credit. I don't really know of any other consumer finance companies that are really truly created for the ISO and the agent.
For the ISO, yeah. I'm not exactly sure of any that are created for the other than those two that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some of these, but I would certainly, for example, TSYS, what it's working with Mastercard is on the issuing side, but I can't imagine that they wouldn't be doing something on the acquiring side at some point.
Right.
So I would, if you're working with TSYS, I would, ping them and see what they're up to.
Yeah, sure. Cool. Love it.
Yeah.
Patty, great information as always. It is such a pleasure to have you back on the show today.
Thank you. It's great to be back, James.
And now, here is Questions from the Field with James Shepard.
So, Patty, I've been working on a new ebook, and I've been really excited about it. Actually, it's about how to sell technology and point of sale solutions, which is a really hot topic. It's been requested a lot, and so I thought on the Questions from the Field today, I just wanted to talk about this kind of misconception about hardware and software, and I want to talk about the importance of sales, onboarding, and support. So,
okay.
One of the things is I'm talking to ISOs, there seems to be this focus on software and hardware, right?
Right.
What are you selling? Paradise? Are you selling Clover? Are you selling Zuza? Are you selling Point? Are you selling whatever, right? And as a result, the ISOs end up with like 8 or 9 or 10 or 12 different solutions that they quote unquote offer. They don't sell any of them, but they offer.
Right.
And
Right.
I think a couple things that I mentioned in the ebook that I wanted to mention in this one. So first of all, there are, some companies now that are starting to make solutions that are tailored more towards the reseller model where you don't have a bunch of them. So for instance, one of my personal favorites we've had on the podcast for quite a few times is Danny at Zuza. So that's getzuza.com. They have a fully white labeled version of this thing. And with their solution, they're doing like features. So you can turn on features instead of having to download apps or,
cool.
Different softwares. It's like, a different software for every vertical. They don't have that. It's just like one software, you flip a switch so that makes it a little easier on training. But my point to all that is what you really have to be careful about is you have to understand that if you really want to sell technology, where you're going to differentiate yourself from Square and Shopify is in sales, onboarding, and service.
Right.
So the irony is these technologies all do amazing things. I mean, they really do, it's amazing what they do. And when you dive into them, I mean, you can take care of like any merchant with Clover. You can take care of like any merchant with Zuza, and so there's these platforms, but the thing is you have to get your sales team to go deep and you have to make sure that they're adopting the technology and that they understand how to create solutions with the technology, because that sales process is what your competitors don't have. Then the next thing is the onboarding. Once you sell a merchant, how are you onboarding them? I was just doing consulting at a great company yesterday that offers quite a few, what I would think is like almost too many different point of sale systems, but because of their onboarding process, it works for them because they are just like, boom, like he was telling me, when they submit a merchant application, the agent has to submit the menu of the restaurant with the merchant app.
Oh, wow.
Otherwise, they won't approve it. Because if they're going to sell, if they're going to get a POS system, right? Because
sure.
they said, we're not going to board this merchant and we don't even have a menu. So they start building the menu before the merchant is even approved. And by the time the merchant is approved, they send out one of these like, an E700 or a Paradise POS or something with a fully loaded menu for that merchant in the box ready to go. Well,
very cool.
That's huge, right? Square is not doing that.
No.
So
nothing like that.
Not even close. So that's that onboarding. And then there's service. You know, you have to be ready to service these merchants. I would say, don't, you know, yeah, you're going to want to have some backup support. You know, I'm thinking of like Boomtown, you know, that offers their third-party support where they'll support different POS systems. I think that's very valuable. But I also think your support team needs to understand the technology systems that you offer. And again, this is why I think it's time. I really believe this, and you're going to hear a lot more from me about this over the coming months here because of my relationship with Zuza and some things I've been doing with them. Is like, I really believe it's time for some of these ISOs and agents to step back and revisit their technology suite. It's like, are you selling this stuff? You know, the fact that you offer 17 different POS systems is irrelevant. The question is, how many are you selling? Because you need to sell technology. If you're not selling technology, you're asking for attrition. So you need to sell it. Well, you know, are you selling it? And if not, it's time to take a step back. And, you know, and again, I mean, you'll find out, and, you know, it's my personal favorite, and I've been working with them for a while, is Zuza. So I'll go ahead and say it. But I think you could definitely do the same with a Clover. You could do the same with other solutions where you could say, let's get 2 or 3 solutions and let's dominate. Like, we've got to know this thing inside and out. We've got to train our salespeople. They need to know what solutions to offer. And so I think, you know, to sell technology, you've really got to get yourself into that place where you know where your agents know what they're talking about. You have a fast and efficient onboarding process, and you're able to support that merchant. Otherwise, your efforts to build a book of business on technology it's just not going to work.
Excellent advice, James.
Thank you for listening to the Merchant Sales Podcast. Whether you are an industry veteran, processing executive, or just trying to learn about the payment space, we appreciate your time. The Merchant Sales Podcast is a joint production of Greensheet.com and ccsalespro.com, and we hope you will tune in next week for more information and tips on building your merchant services business.